Hey everybody, it's Uncle John from Your Story Hour, and I'm back to bring you another chapter of Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, and Still Mo by the author Sam Campbell. Today's chapter is number 17, and it's entitled Spring Cleaning. It was a somewhat disorderly forest we gazed on when we returned to the North Country. The woodland floor looked as if nature had swept all her dirt under the carpet of winter, and now this covering had been whisked away. Crumpled fern fronds and old leaves lay matted on the earth. Shapeless clusters of last year's grass were heaped along the shoreline as though yesterday had tossed her toggery carelessly to the winds. Along the shores rolled driftwood at the fingertips of the waves like toys discarded by the waters. Trees had their hair up in rag curlers, the leafless branches standing straight and stiff in the springtime sky. Over the countryside hung a blue haze drifting down from some faraway forest fire, a veil through which the sun peeked weakly, and it seemed that nature had no curtains at her windows, for we could see far back through the shoreline groves to the hillsides that were obscured when summer foliage draped the landscape. As our canoe approached the island, everything combined to make us feel as if we had slipped up on nature when she wasn't expecting us. There were distant calls from ravens, crows, and blue jays, but not a creature met us as we landed. In earlier years, Salt and Pepper or Inky or one of the other animals had been at the shore to greet us, but now there was not even a chipmunk. "What is the matter here?" exclaimed Jenny as we set our luggage ashore. "Surely someone is around. Stubby, Beggar Boy, Stillmo, where are you?" she called. But her only answer was an echo bounding around the near shores saying, "Are you, are you, are you?" Even our cuddly little cabin seemed to yawn and stretch as we entered, its doors creaking in a mild objection to being disturbed so early in the year. But we have learned that there are two things to do to take the chill of disuse from a house. One is to light a fire, and the other to have a bite to eat. It doesn't need to be a big fire or much of a meal. The important thing is that you have added something of your own to your surroundings to make you a part of it. Jenny and I have a get-acquainted routine as we enter our home after an absence. We do not unpack at once. First, there must be a grate fire to send its warmth about the room while the tongues of flames gossip about everything that has happened in past months. Then there must be a hot beverage, coffee, tea, or a cup of soup. We rescue two chairs out of the disorder, and there in the midst of 1,000 things to do, we sit before the fire and sip and talk. Every warm swallow carries us farther into our home and cuts away the feeling of strangeness. It is toward the bottom of the second cup, near the ashes of the third armload of wood, that we get that completely moved-in feeling. And it was near the bottom of our second cup of tea this morning that things began to happen normally about the cabin. Several blue jays lighted in a tree near the feeding station, and Jenny had to hustle some breadcrumbs out to them. This was normal. Seldom in the past had we finished a meal without some creature demanding service. We had resumed our sipping when a little sound drew our attention to the window. There we saw a funny little face peering in at us. There were tiny, bead-like eyes, small cupped ears, and a face so smeared with mud we couldn't tell its color or shape. But back of it we saw sticking up a thick, bushy red tail with a cluster of black feathers at its tip. "Stillmo! Stillmo!" we called in unison. Ginny swallowed her tea so quickly it burned all the way down, and I spilled mine in my lap as we rushed to the door to see our friend. He was so startled at this excitement, he disappeared under the house. In a moment, though, he was back, chirping little questions as he advanced cautiously toward us. He wasn't quite sure at first. Lots had happened since he had last seen us. The problems of winter had made him wary and perhaps had caused him to forget some things about our companionship. Now both Jenny and I were in the yard kneeling, coaxing him to come to us and offering him peanuts which we had made sure to bring along. He was inching toward us, terribly excited and anxious, but ready to make a hasty retreat if things didn't look right. He moved up until his mud-spattered nose touched the peanut Giny was holding. For a moment, all three of us became perfectly still. Stillmo took the peanut gently. He sat up and turned it over and over in his front feet, thoroughly examining it. Then, with sudden enthusiasm, he took it in his mouth and went skipping across the ground, chattering his delight. Giny and I placed more peanuts on the ground and now went happily about our work of getting life started at the cabin. Our first pet had returned, so the season had officially begun. Stillmo did not give us a chance to forget that he was there either. When the supply of peanuts ran low, he told us about it in his own way. He ran up and down the screen door, across the roof, jumped up on the windowsill, and when we left the door open for a moment, he came inside and ran all over everything. Within an hour, both Stubby and Beggar Boy had put in an appearance. It was another moment of excitement when we saw them. They had little trouble in identifying us. For just a moment, Stubby stood studying us in silence. Then, sure of himself, he ran straight to me and jumped up on my outstretched hand. Here he sat, loading his mouth with the nuts I held for him, with as much confidence as he had had when we saw him months before. When Beggar Boy saw us, he didn't even hesitate. Coming from behind me, he jumped as high as he could, catching a foothold in my clothes, then climbed to my shoulder and then on top of my head. He still favored one leg a bit, though he ran well, and there was a scar on his face too, but otherwise he was strong, healthy, and apparently a happy chipmunk. As hours went by, more chipmunks and more birds reported in. Mrs. Beggar Boy and Junior were there, and several new ones. But we came to realize that Stillmo was the only one of our squints remaining. Meeny and Mo, who had been there in the autumn when we had left, were missing in action. Where and when they had gone, we could only guess. Our guesses were not very pleasant ones. We missed the little red rascals. We had learned to know our squints well, and when one learns really to know anyone in this world, one is bound to love him. The more I see of life, the surer I become that it is more important to love than to be loved. If there were no other benefit, that fact justifies the love of nature and her creatures. It is just plain good for us to love. Whatever it does to that which is loved, it frees within us greater health and happiness, enhancing our talents and abilities. I could not guess how much affection we rated with the squints. Perhaps to them we were just a fine supply of peanuts. Maybe the idea of actually caring for us never entered their little self-centered red squirrel minds. But that did not matter. I felt like saying to them, "Go on, think as you please about me. That is your own affair. Just remember, though, it's none of your business if I love you." From our viewpoint, they were something to love, and so they were an opportunity. Life at the sanctuary now got underway. Every hour, things became more beautiful. The woods underwent a thorough house cleaning and straightening up. Spring washed the countryside down with driving rains and then polished it up with sunshine. With its winds, it dusted off the forest and brought forth leaf buds on barren twigs. New grasses and ferns came out in great numbers to change the forest floor from brown to green. Waves of warblers flew through the enlivened trees, breaking silence with the sweetness of their song. Starflowers, spring beauties, lilies of the valley, and the sweet-scented arbutus came forth to perfume the air. The atmosphere was cleansed of its smoke haze. The sun shone brilliantly from flawless blue skies. In a few days, nature's house had been set in order, and everything was busy growing. Giny and I had been about as busy as spring itself. The day neared when Duke was to arrive. Several telegrams told us of his coming, and how anxious he was to get there. We had lots of help in our work as usual. I had to patch up the holes in Duke's tent, which Stillmo had made. But for a while he kept pace with me. As fast as I patched one, he chewed another. I finally discouraged him by placing squares of screen wire on all of his approaches to the tent. After that, he gave up for the time being. Boats had to be painted, and Stubby helped with that by tipping over a can of paint. Jenny hung up some washing between two trees back of the cabin, and Stillmo promptly chewed the clothesline in two and dropped the clothes on the ground. Things were getting back to normal, all right. Well, it's something to tell Duke anyway, Jenny had said about her clothesline disaster. We found that that was the way we were thinking about all events, in terms of sharing them with Duke. So it was that the last night before his arrival, we sat together at the fireplace and made a list of all we should tell him. We hadn't seen Salt and Pepper, the pesky porcupines, but from down the shores of a lake had come a story that indicated that they were at large. Here, a man had returned to his woods cabin for just a few days' vacation. The first night, he had heard a noise on his back porch. Looking out, he saw two porcupines sitting there looking up at him. Puzzled, he opened the door. The porcupines promptly came in, filed past him without so much as a greeting, went on into his living room, and sat down before the fireplace. He didn't know how to talk to them. He didn't know how to shoo them, and certainly he didn't know how to pick them up, nor did he want to try to learn. Finally, with the aid of a broom, to the tune of much indignant grumbling by the porcupines, he managed to push them out. Duke would get a laugh out of that, we reasoned. Also, Bluey was back putting on comedy stunts. He was catching peanuts as we tossed them in the air and was constantly making life miserable for Stillmo. Link had showed up looking like some hobo in the loose folds of skin that hung from her since hibernation. We wished we might have a way to call all the woods creatures together and tell them that they must be their funniest, or Duke must laugh. But we had something to learn about Duke. Something quite painful. And that is the end of chapter number 17. Come back tomorrow, and Aunt Nikki will have chapter 18 for you that is entitled A String That Stretches. Have to see what that's about tomorrow. See you then. Bye-bye.